Good afternoon, and welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I am W.D. Foster Graham. I'm the book review editor for Inside News, and I will be your host today for the Conversation with Al McFarlane. We provide stimulating, robust, and insightful commentary about all things related to the African diaspora. As you know, Thursday is our guest author day. And so I'll be happy to introduce our guest author for the day, Ms. Colnese Hendon. Before that, I want to just do a shout out to viewers and listeners. You can say to like, share, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube, Insight News Minnesota. We have reached 500 subscribers, and we're going toward that goal of 1,000. Now, without further ado, I shall give you an introduction about our guest for this day. Now, Colnese Hendon enjoys writing memoir, short stories, and poetry. Her memoir, Blend In or Fade Out, was published by Stride Publishing in 2022. She is a fellow of the Givens Foundation for African American Literature, the Hurston Wright Foundation, VONA Voices, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the Write of Your Life Writers Workshop in Venice, Italy. Hendon's poetry and short stories have been published in Ishmael Reed's online Kunk magazine and the Minnesota Literary Council's Black History Matters anthology. Hendon's educational background includes a Bachelor of Arts degree in Professional Communications and Public Relations and a master's degree in Public and Nonprofit Administration from Metropolitan State University. She is employed by Southside Harm Reduction Services as their developmental lead. So it's my pleasure to introduce Colnese Hendon.
Well, hello there. Nice. I'm so thankful that you're having me on the show today.
We are so happy to have you, Colnese. And I guess it was great to see you once again at the Minnesota Black Authors Expo this year.
Yes, that was a nice event. I enjoyed it.
Tell me about your experiences.
As an author or in general?
At NBAE.
Okay. Well, it actually was my second time going. The first time was prior to my book being published, and that was in 2021. And so this time was my first time going as a published author, and I truly enjoyed the reception, the entertainment the night before, and then the event. I met a lot of nice people, and there was a lot of good entertainment there as well in terms of readers and authors. So yeah, I totally enjoyed it.
Yes, and as we know, just from your bio, you like me, we are wordsmiths, and that bears out in your history and in your book. So, why don't you say? Can you just give us a little more about your background?
Okay, so I grew up here in the Twin Cities. I grew up in South Minneapolis. I attended public schools in South Minneapolis. For a brief time, I went to Breck School during middle school. And I've worked in the nonprofit sector for the last, I would say, 30 years. Prior to that, I worked at First Bank Plymouth, which is on Plymouth Avenue North, or which was. It has since closed. And I was a court reporter for Hennepin County District Court. I've also spent 9 years as a guardian ad litem for kids in the child welfare system, advocating for them in court and in other areas of their lives. And I have 3 children and 9 grandchildren.
Oh, awesome. So, in reference in your book, it is a memoir. What would you consider the positive aspects of being adopted? Since, like I said, that is one of the focuses in the book.
I think for me, and I guess other children as well, whose parents are unable to keep them, or whatever circumstances lead them to need to be adopted. I believe adoption is a better option than foster care because of the stability and just overall being part of a family instead of moving from family to family, which can be very damaging. So within my own family, I had a very wonderful set of parents. I had everything in terms of love, in terms of a stable home, in terms of education, enrichment, everything that parents would endeavor to give their children were given to me. So I would say that that's a positive aspect, is becoming part of a family. When you prior to being adopted, you didn't have one.
Yeah, because I've heard so many like horror stories in like the foster care system, and I guess that like the system itself, we know many ways it's flawed.
Yes.
I said, when it comes to the flip side, what were say the negative aspects for you?
I think that the negative aspect came about when I became a teenager. When I was a child, I mean, I was told by my parents at a very young age that I was adopted.
Mhm.
And so I was aware of it, but it didn't have any real meaning to me initially, other than I would wonder, from time to time, who are my biological parents, and what were the circumstances that led me to being adopted. But then when I became a teenager, I think the reality hit me when I was, and I write about this in my memoir, Blend In or Fade Out, where I traveled. Every summer we would go on a vacation to visit my mom and dad's families. My dad, his family, quite a few of them were in Chicago, and then he also had family in Indianapolis. And then we would travel on to Ohio, to where my mother was originally from. And so this particular summer, when I was 15 years old, I remember going to my grandmother's house. And of course, because we hadn't seen each other for a long time, we would take pictures, family pictures. And back then they had what was called a Polaroid camera. And that's a camera that you could instantly get pictures developed, because that was way before digital photography and all that. You used to take with a camera with film, and you'd have to take it and get it developed, and that was time consuming. So there was a Polaroid camera. We were having fun with it. It was a new gadget. And so we took a picture, and then we passed it around after it developed. And that's when I think it struck me. I think prior to that I had known, I don't know, I don't think I was that conscious of the fact I looked very different from my adoptive family. But anyway, this particular day, I looked, as the photo was being passed around, I looked at myself, and I was just so different. Skin tone, hair texture, so many different things. I was different from my dad's side of the family. And it really bothered me, because in that picture, I could see how much everyone else looked like. And that was when I think the reality of it kind of really struck me. And so that would, I for me, that was probably the only negative. Just, well, it's a huge one. I will not try to minimize it. Not knowing where you came from, it can gnaw at you, it can eat at you. And everyone doesn't have the same experience, because my brother, he's never questioned, never looked back. He's just totally just accepted, all the benefits of our family, but me, I was, I guess, more inquisitive, like, oh, who are these people and what happened? So.
Understood. And I know something else that you had learned when you were in your 20s. You said that you had learned at that time that you were a biracial woman.
Right.
So tell me more about that discovery and that journey.
Okay, so growing up, and in most, I would say most African American families, there's a range of skin tone. And so in my family, like my mom's side of the family, they were from Ohio. They were mixed with Native American and Black. And I think possibly even there was a white slave master in there somewhere. On my dad's side, they were not as racially mixed. So my dad's side of the family was darker in complexion. So my point is that I was used to a range of colors, and my brother and I looked very much alike, even though biologically we were not blood related, but we looked alike. So I had someone in my family I looked like, and I didn't question. I People would ask me like at school, "Oh, are you mixed?" Because that was the terminology back then. Biracial was kind of more recent.
Mhm.
And oh no, I'm not, because I was a kid. It's like my mom and dad are black, I'm black. And so that was how I developed my racial identity. Because my parents didn't talk about, and once they told me I was adopted, it was just kind of a closed book, like, okay, but we didn't talk about it. And so it wasn't until I became, and I think I was in my late teens, um, maybe early 20s, but I think it was my late teens. And one day I just looked in the mirror and I just kind of was struck by, oh, I wonder, I had never asked the question. So I asked my mother, she was in the kitchen cooking dinner, and I said, Mom, I said, was my biological mother white? And she said, oh, yeah, she was, real casual, cavalier, like, no big deal. But for me, it was like a shock because it kind of shifted, what I had thought about myself, in terms of my racial identity and my heritage. And so yeah, that was something I had to reconcile. And eventually, and even to this day, I just identify as African American because I don't know that much about my biological mother's side of the family. I, was not raised, you know, understanding or knowing the culture of their family. And they're from Norway. They Her parents immigrated to America in 1928. And so her mother spoke. I never met her mother because she passed away before I was born. I mean, before I met my biological mother. But she spoke Norwegian, and my younger sister, who my mother had like 8 years after I was born, she was very close to to our grandmother or her grandmother, and so she can speak a few words, and she remembers like some of the cultural aspects of being Norwegian. But I don't have that history or that experience, and so I've just decided, or I don't even think it's a conscious decision. I just see myself as African American, and some might debate that, but that's just how I was socialized, how I was culturalized, and how I was brought up.
Yeah, I know. Identity does play in a factor, especially when it comes to adoption. Um, so, as an adult, when were you able to, learn who your birth parents were, and when you met them, how that it impact you? Because I remember reading a section where you did make an attempt once, but you couldn't access the records.
Right. When I turned 18 years old, my mother told me that my brother's godfather was the attorney who had been involved in finalizing the adoption. So I had tried to, even as a child, calling Hennepin County Records, trying to find out if they would release my birth records, and they were sealed. And I even, at 18, I started the process of trying to find out who my birth mother was. And my godfather had the records, because he was the attorney, and he was able to tell me my birth mother's name, which was Nancy Hansen.
Mhm.
But when the process of initiating a search at that time, I don't know if it's changed, is you have to write a letter to the Department of Vital Statistics, and then they in turn will contact the adoption agency that you were adopted through. In my case, it was Children's Home Society. And so when the search was initiated, I was assigned a caseworker or a worker, social worker, and she attempted to locate my birth mother, but at that time she wasn't able to, because her maiden name is Hansen, and like the state of Minnesota is filled with Norwegian immigrants. So Hanson is a very
Yeah.
common name here. And
Yes.
so she wasn't able to locate her at that time. And so I just kind of dropped it at that point. I just decided, okay, well, that's just a closed door that will possibly never be opened. But then 4 years later, when she was getting ready to retire, my file and a couple other files were the ones that had not been resolved. And so before she retired, she had said to herself as a goal, I'm going to work on these files and see if I can close these cases before I retire. And so one day I was at work and I got a call from her. Her name was Meiko Ito. And she said, Colnese, just and she explained what I just explained about her process and why she, was contacting me. She said, I decided to take another stab at trying to locate your birth mother. And she said, when I looked in the file, I noticed that two of your uncles have very or somewhat unusual names. One's name was Leo, one's name was Rooney. The other one's name was Eric with a K, which is a little different, from the average Eric. So she looked again. She was able to contact one of my uncles, and he in turn put her in contact with my birth mother. And so I was able to meet her that very same day. And it was so overwhelming.
I have no words. It doesn't make. I can only imagine what
Yeah,
that was like.
It was really overwhelming because I had given up.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like, God, he just opened that door for me. And I just really am grateful because, I think it's just so important. And it's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I don't think that the average person, who knows their family, knows their history, I don't think well, this was my thought. I may be dead wrong, but my thought was that the average person doesn't know what that feels like, not to know who you are, and not to know, what were the circumstances that your mother, couldn't keep you. And so it was just really like information that I needed, like for my own mental health, for my own sense of self, for my own psychological well-being. And so it was very, I would say it was a good thing. I mean, it didn't necessarily have like that storybook ending that I think we all are looking for in life. I mean, we met, and there was a lot of hard feelings that I harbored. And I think I didn't know this then, but since then I've done research on what it's like to be a mother that places a child for adoption. And they also have issues they suffer. Most of them suffer from that. And at that point, I was too young and immature, I think, to consider her side of things. I only considered my side, and I just, my side was bitterness and hurt and feeling like, why did you give me away? That was my immature. I mean, I won't even call it an immature response. I'll call it my real live, real raw. This is how I feel. And so the fact that she had her own feelings, because it turns out she didn't want to give me away. She had to. She was a teenager. Her father had passed away the year before. Her mother was an immigrant woman struggling to maintain a household, very limited English. I found out later she worked downtown in one of the hotels as a maid, and so she didn't really have an option to keep me. She did not have the the support, that a teenage mother needs. A teenage mother needs support from her extended family. If she's not married and doesn't have a husband, she needs that. She didn't have it. And then, of course, in the 1950s, as to this day, there's still a racial divide. I think, it has eased up somewhat in terms of there's a lot more interracial couples who are married and they make it and they have kids and they have families, and um, I'm sure many of them are doing just fine. But back then, it was not. In many of the states in this country, it was even illegal to marry someone outside of your race. So there, it was just not a. It was a very hostile environment when it came to not only being an unmarried mother, because that was a stigma attached to that in the 50s that's not attached to this today in our modern day society. There's not as much of a stigma being an unmarried parent, but then it was. And then, of course, the racial thing. So that was what really happened. And I understand that now, and I accept it.
That's something that as we get older, do we getting wisdom, getting understanding, those sort of things as well, especially when it comes to adoption or seeing, okay, walking in the other person's shoes. Would you agree?
I really do agree. I really do. And so we were never able to get close
Hmm.
because of that, because of both of us kind of bouncing off each other, meaning
Hmm.
she sensed my resentment or whatever my internal feelings were. She put a wall up, and so that was just kind of where we left it.
Hmm.
But, you know, I, I hope and pray that maybe one day, like in the next world, we'll be able to resolve that, but on the other side of the coin, now that I've met my biological mother, and then she in turn told me who my biological father was, and I had a chance to meet him and get to know him and his family, and so now that I have children of my own, which I did even then, my daughter was very young at that time, and then I have since had a son, and then I adopted another son. But anyway, even though I didn't grow up with my biological family, my children were able to know who their cousins are and who their uncles and their aunts, and they know who their extended family is, and that always helps. So it's I think it's a work in progress, because even when you know your biological family, you don't always, because you didn't grow up together, there's still not that 100% that family feeling that you can have when you do grow up together. So what I just read a book by an author named Angela Tucker, and it is, what is the name of it? Anyway, I'll think of it in a minute. But it's called "You Should Be Grateful," and she was transracially adopted. And so gratefulness and gratitude is something a lot of adopted kids feel, or I don't know, I never got the feeling from my parents that I should be grateful. So that might be transracially adopted kids, experience that more, or that's more of an issue. But at any rate, she came up with this term in her book. It's called Sonder sphere. And that is a term that she used to describe what becomes your network and what becomes your family when you're adopted. Because, I have relationships with my adoptive family. I have relationships with my biological family. And then I have relationships, and I don't know if this is just because when you are adopted, you learn how to adapt and be a part of other families very easily. So I have like huge networks of people who I have like a whole host of young people that call me godmother, and I have a lot of nieces and nephews who are not really my nieces and nephews, who call me auntie. And
Mhm.
I've just embraced family in a different way. And I love the fact that Angela Tucker, coined a term for it, because I think that makes, in my opinion, being adopted, it makes you a very unique, it makes your experience unique, because you don't see family in quite the same way. So in my case, I believe I'm more open to what makes a family and what constitutes a family. And so I think there are positive things and negative things. And the negative things are just the hurt feelings. And even in writing my memoir, I struggled then, and I still struggle with my wanting to, even in exploring it, I feel in a way I'm not being loyal to my parents who raised me,
Mm.
because they gave me everything. And when I say that, I don't mean just material things.
Mhm.
They gave me like love. They gave me just so much in terms of experiences and just a feeling of acceptance and support. I had that up until the day that they passed away. And my
Mhm.
dad passed away at 94. My mother passed away at 100 years old. And that
Mhm.
was only 3 years ago. So she's only been gone 3 years. And I'm so thankful that I had the time, like after my dad passed away at 94, my mom moved in with me, because as long as there was the two of them, they were able to live in their home, and they supported each other in terms of
Mhm.
what my dad was visually impaired near the end. He had diabetes, and it affected his vision. So the things he couldn't do, she could do for him. Like,
Mhm.
he was diabetic. She was a retired nurse. She managed his diabetes in terms of his insulin and all those things, and his
Right.
diet, and keeping him going. And then the things that she needed help with, he helped her with that. So they were able to, as a team, live together in their own home until they were 94. But after he passed away, my mom moved in with me for 4 years. And then in her last, I think, year and a half, 2 years, she did need to go into a nursing home, because she got to where she could not stand, and it was hard to transfer her, like from the bed to the wheelchair and things like that. But I'm so thankful, that I had that time. So I think gratitude may be a part of it, because I really felt like, okay, now I can do something for you.
Mhm.
Because if and my dad, I helped, even when they were in the home, I still would come over and help them do certain things. And I felt like without them, where would my life be? I think kids that are born to their parents and they're raised by their parents, they don't have to think about that. But for me, I realized that had they not decided, oh, we want to adopt a child, I don't know where I would be. I don't know what my life would have been like, because like, I, as a guardian ad litem for kids in foster care, and the fact that my adopted son, I adopted him about 3 months before he turned 18, because he wanted to be adopted. He had been in the system most of his life, and he had been in like over 20 placements, and he had been in a lot of group homes and facilities and homes, some very abusive. I mean, he really went through a lot. And he asked me, because people say, well, why did you adopt a kid that old? And I was like, he asked me to. I mean, that's the simplest answer I can come up with. He felt like that was important. I'm like, well, why does
Right.
that mean so much to you? You're already almost grown up now. And he said, well, when you're in foster care, that's kind of like the goal, or like a carrot that they hang over a foster kid's head, like, oh, adoption is kind of like the end all and be all, And
Mhm.
so I felt like I wanted to give that to him. I wanted him to feel like he was worthy, and he was loved, and he could have someone that wanted him, because that's one of the underlying issues when you're in foster care or adopted, is that you know it, somewhere deep down inside of you, that something went wrong in your family, and it may make you question your self-worth and your self-value. So I don't remember where I was going with this, but I was just trying to share, about what the experience can be with, and yeah, now I remember now. I was trying to loop back to when I've looked at, his life and other lives, people I know who did go through the system, and I recognize that by my parents adopted me, I didn't have to go through that. So I was happy to be able to give back to them. Like, you gave so much to me and my brother, and so I'm so happy to be able to give back to them, and I did. And so I have no guilt or regrets. I feel like I was a horrible child. Let's not lie. Let's not get it twisted. But I was able to redeem myself as an adult.
Thank you very much, Colnese. So right now we're going to take a brief break here, and then we'll come back and continue our talk. And just thank you so much for sharing your story regarding adoption and your testimony. That's why I put it, testimony. So
thank you.
Okay, time for a station break.
Are you or someone you know recovering financially from the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdown, or any other reason? If so, help is available. Findhelp.org is a site to find a wide range of resources, including food, medical care, and more. The best part is based on your zip code. Visit findhelp.org, enter your zip code and the service you need. You'll get a map directing you to the organizations that can help you. Help is waiting at findhelp.org. If you need help starting anew, findhelp.org is the site for you.
Thank you. Welcome back to the conversation with Al McFarlane and our guest author, Colnese Hendon. During our break, I was thinking of one thing about, you write about colorism. That's something that shows up in the Black community. Could you elaborate on what has been like then versus now, that whole issue?
Yeah, so as a light-complected African-American person, and my dad was a very dark-complected African-American person, and so I have experienced colorism, and I watched my dad and other friends of mine or other people in our community who are dark-skinned, how colorism affects them. And as a child, and I detailed some of this in the book, where on the playground, dark complected people were taunted with, little nursery rhymes, just nasty things about being, back then, if someone called you Black, those were fighting words, because it was before James Brown came out with Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. There was so much shame around being a Black person or a dark complected Black person. And on the flip side of that, if you were a light complected person, sometimes you may have felt the wrath of how society had placed these values on dark skin or light skin. And so it's just ugly all the way around. And so when I was working at Sabathani Community Center, there was a woman she was an activist. She was a politician. She was so many things. Her name was Dorothy Woolfolk. And she told me about the Willie Lynch theory, or the Willie Lynch syndrome. And it was this slave master who, back like 300 years, or back in the 1700s or something, he came up with a theory on how to keep your slaves subdued. And you guys can Google it, the Willie Lynch theory. And so what he outlined in this theory is how you pit your slaves against each other. And you can pit them against each other on many different things. It can be their skin complexion, it can be their hair texture, it can be how fat they are, how skinny they are, whatever it is. If you instill that in them, like, oh, these slaves are getting better treatment because they're lighter, or these slaves are getting worse treatment because they're darker, and you pit these slaves against each other on these categories, he said, I guarantee you'll be able to control your slaves for the next 300 years and it will keep perpetuating itself. And so that is what I'm seeing in the Black community. Even though we're not in slavery anymore, these negative messages that we've internalized we continue to act ugly towards one another, or just put down the next person for things that none of us can help. You know, when we're born, our DNA has already decided what we're going to look like. And so just like I didn't choose to be this complexion, the next person didn't choose to be their complexion. And so we're targeting one another for things that we cannot change. And so the reason I decided to bring it up in my book is because I just think it's important. And I didn't hopefully, I don't believe I preached or beat anyone over the head with it. I just dropped little nuggets throughout of examples of how it played out in my life, you know, how it's played mainly my own life, because I can't speak for the next person. But I just remember my dad was very dark skinned, and one of my friends in first grade, she got mad at me over or not wanting to share my crayons, or like that was what the issue was. And so she retaliated by calling my dad black, like, with your old black dad, I don't be your friend anyway, with your old black dad, you know. And at that time, I wasn't taught, like in my household, my parents didn't teach us to value complexion, like one complexion is better than the other complexion. So it was new to me. I was probably 5 or 6 years old. I had never heard of that before. So, but the way she said it, I knew she was making an insult to me, you know, and my dad. And so I just remember, you know, saying, well, you're black too, you know. And then I was nervous because she came from a really big family. And then and now, you know, it's like, if you fight one person in the family, you might have to fight more.
I know that's right.
Right. So I was like, you know, but thankfully she was just so surprised that I said that, you know, we dropped it. But it was hurtful to me at the time. And I remember as an adult, now this was 24 years to be exact, from the day I was born. I was adopted 4 months after I was born. And I went down to Chicago to spend the 4th of July weekend, and my aunt and I were sitting having, you know, coffee in the morning, breakfast, not breakfast. We were done with breakfast. We were watching TV a Sunday morning, reading the Sunday paper. And she suddenly just out of the blue said, you know what I've never understood? And I was like, no, what's that? And she said, I never understood, as dark as my brother is, why your mother went and adopted such white looking kids. And I was just stunned, you know, and I was, you know, it just, I don't know if, I'm sure you have, all of us have experienced someone say something that comes out the blue and you don't really know how to respond at that moment because you're still reeling, like, what, you know? So I sat there and tried to think of reasons why, like, well, maybe there weren't any other darker kids available, or, you know, I was just trying to help her figure it out. But it hurt me to think that all the years that I had been her niece, you know, we had like we went to Chicago every single summer. So we spent time every year doing family things, family gatherings, funerals, weddings, you name it. And we were close. And I just couldn't, I was like, oh, okay. So even though we have this bond, my color still bothers you, you know? And I think that when you think about colorism, I think we're more acquainted with what it's like to be on the side of how dark-skinned people have been really tormented and downgraded and a lot of horrible things, you know, throughout our history. The brown paper bag societies, this is something I never saw, but I heard about, where you couldn't go to certain parties or certain functions, especially in certain places that are really color struck, or at least they're rumored to be, like Washington, D.C. And I think I've heard that New Orleans is like that, and just probably who knows, everywhere probably to a certain degree, but there were these brown paper bag parties where if your skin was darker than a brown paper bag, you couldn't come to the party. So that's why I decided to at least populate part of my book with some of those things. It's like we need to look in the mirror. And I think in reading other people's stories, we are able to read someone else's story, but some of it may resonate with us. Like, oh, yeah, I remember something like that happened to me, or I remember, whatever. I think that all of us that are Black and we live in this country, or maybe even abroad, because I understand it's not just isolated to the United States. I once worked at a Latina and Latino organization, Latina actually, because it was for women. It was a Latina organization, and I remember sitting in on a Zoom presentation about colorism in the Latina community, the Latin community, like South America, Mexico, the Caribbean, same thing. Africa, you see African women lightening their skin. Europe, it's everywhere. And I really think it's something that we need to look at as a race. And we have to let it go. We have to really, truly internalize and believe that Black is beautiful, no matter if you're pale as a ghost or if you're as dark as the Ace of Spades, as the terminology goes. It's like it's all beautiful and it's all God's creation, and He does not make mistakes. So we have to let go of our internalized oppression and our internalized colorism and feel good no matter what color we come out of the womb with. We're beautiful. And so that's my rant about colorism.
Well, Colnese, as one who comes from a large extended family who has a color spectrum from high yellow and light to dark, and even in my own immediate family, I'm inclined to agree. Now, when I was reading your book, now, since I am also a baby boomer, so many things about it was like going down memory lane, places, people, all the above with that flavor of Minneapolis back in the day. One character stuck out for me because the name was familiar and stuff, and who is Trash Can Annie?
Yes.
Tell me about her, and then we're going to go into an excerpt from your book.
Okay. So Trash Can Annie was a lady who lived in our neighborhood, and she would go up and down the alleys picking trash, and she was just a fixture in the neighborhood. And it's so funny that you bring that up, because most of the people who have read my book who are from the South Side of Minneapolis all knew who Trash Can Annie was, and that resonated with them. And so she was just a character. She was a person, but she was also a character that was part of our lives as children, because we always played outside. We played in the alley, so we were always there when she would come through. And she dressed like a man. She wore a headscarf around her hair, and she picked in the trash. That was what she did. And there were rumors about her, like, oh, she was really a rich woman, wealthy, and one time there was a fire in her house, and they found a trunk full of money, and that when her husband died, she started dressing in his clothes. There were so many different theories and rumors about her. But yeah, she was part of the neighborhood, part of the folklore of South Minneapolis.
Well, being from South Minneapolis myself, yes, she was.
Yeah, she was. And what really was interesting, a friend of mine who I grew up with and went to grade school with, told me that was her great grandmother. It was her dad's grandmother. So she had a family, and we don't ever know what happens to people that makes people go in different directions. And so I just think about her fondly and hope that she's well wherever she is. I know she's gone on to the next world, but yeah, she was definitely part of my childhood.
Likewise here. So now, that being said, can you share an excerpt from your book?
Okay, I shall do. So this is a chapter in the book and it's called Bonding. It was a warm summer day in early September 1998. I was sitting at my desk in front of the computer screen, focused on completing a grant proposal, when the phone rang. Good afternoon, Sabathani Community Center, I greeted the caller. Colnese, if you want to see Nancy before she dies, you need to visit her today. She's at North Memorial's Hospice in Brooklyn Center. It was Lynn, my sister China's husband. It had been nearly 15 years since I met Nancy when I was 26 and she was 43 years old. After our initial reunion, we had not developed a close relationship. I could not get over being given up for adoption, nor could I transcend the racial and cultural gap between my African American upbringing and Nancy's Norwegian heritage. Apparently, neither could Nancy's extended family. The only other relative I had met on her side of the family was her brother Leo, a North Minneapolis police officer. Meeting him was happenstance. It had taken place only because the bank where I worked at the time had been robbed, and he was one of the officers dispatched to the location. Despite my distance from Nancy, I was able to develop a relationship with my sister China and her immediate family, which included my niece Jaquela, 3 nephews, Brian, Christopher, Trahan, and their father Lynn. After asking Lynn for directions to the hospice, I left work and drove straight over there. In early June, Nancy had been diagnosed with lung cancer, which had metastasized to her brain. Although she had undergone chemotherapy, the cancer was too far gone. Now she was dying. When I arrived, Nancy was sitting up in bed, eating chunks of fresh fruit from a small bowl. The brightly colored cantaloupe, watermelon, and honeydew looked inviting. Her failing organs had infused her normally pale white skin with varying shades of olive green. A colorful silk scarf covered her head. When I had asked the men in her life to tell me about my mother, they had described Nancy's hair to me before describing anything else about her. Her first husband, Pumpkin, reminisced about how Nancy's long, thick, wavy hair had glowed beautifully in the sunlight with hints of auburn. He described how her long hair cascaded down her back and nearly reached her butt as she walked down the street in the summertime. I remembered how on the day I met her, my baby nephew Brian cuddled in her arms and rubbed her hair between his small fingers as he fell asleep. Now Nancy's trademark hair was all gone. I sat down in a chair near her bed and attempted to talk with her. Are you afraid? I asked. Nancy shook her head and firmly said no. I believed her. Although I didn't know her very well, our shared bloodline helped me understand her. I saw in her expression my own firm resolution when I held a strong opinion or belief. As I sat there, I noticed Nancy staring at me unwaveringly. It was as though she was attempting to commit to memory all my facial features, each strand of hair on my head, and the placement of every freckle on my face. I looked away for a moment, and when I turned back to her, I saw that her eyes continued to be locked on mine. I was reminded of the day my daughter was born. I recalled the intensity of her eyes as she stared into mine when I held her shortly after her birth. The attending nurse had explained it was one of the ways infants bonded with their mothers. I realized with a start that Nancy had never bonded with me as a baby. During the 1950s, when I was born, mothers placing their babies for adoption were not allowed to hold them nor spend any time with them. Now that she was dying, Nancy was spending some of her last moments on earth to finally bond with me. As I left the hospice room, I patted her on her foot and said goodbye. It was the last time we saw each other, but it was also the first time.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
One thing I noticed here, it's a quote that you given, and I was going to share it with our readers and our
Okay.
viewers. And so you talk about Our Deepest Fear by Marianne Williamson. And after I finish it, I would love to have you share how that has resonated within you.
Okay.
Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It is not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we're liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.
Yes, that quote resonates with me and hopefully with every listener that's in the audience today, because I believe that it's so true. We are all born to manifest the glory of God. And a lot of things in life happen to make us feel bad sometimes about ourselves. In my case, it was because I was given away at birth. But as I began to have a relationship with the Lord, I learned that He has a purpose for every last one of our lives, and we are here for a purpose. And no matter how you got here or how I got here, we all can do good in this world. And just trying to shrink yourselves um, and try to always downplay yourself instead of letting your light shine, meaning being the best, the brightest, and the most wonderful person that you can be. And when you do that, then that gives other people permission. Because one of the things growing up in a predominantly Black school, that I remember that the kids that were considered smart sometimes were taunted. And I think that's something that goes back to slavery. And then since then I've worked with a lot of African people that were raised on the continent, and even people that were raised in the Caribbean around all Black people, and they didn't experience the oppression that we have. They have a lot of pride in themselves, and they value education, and they exhibit those qualities. And I believe we as African American people, we are so talented. We have so much that God gave us from birth. We have so much to share. So I think that if we liberate ourselves to share all of our talents and to be the best we can, then anyone who has been trying to hide their talents and their strengths, they will feel liberated. Like, you know what? I can do something good too. We all have different talents. You may be able to sing. I can't. I can barely talk, but I can do something else. I know how to write. And the next person may be able to draw. The next person might be able to clean houses well. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be something big and grandiose, but whatever we can do, let's do it to the best, do it to the max, and make this world a much better place.
Amen to that, indeed. Now comes a big question for our readers and our viewers. Where can we purchase your work?
Okay, so my publisher, Stride Publishing, she has 2 bookstores in downtown Minneapolis. One is in the IDS building and one is on 9th and Nicollet Mall, and it's called Stride Bookstore. You can pick up a copy there. It's also in the Moon Palace Bookstore on Lake Street off of Minnehaha. And then if you go to my website, and it's, yes, right there, colnesehendon.com, or you can scan this QR code. You can order it from my website. You can order it from strivepublishing.com. You can even order it from Amazon. So the book is there, and I'm hoping you'll read it, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you. I would also ask this question because I believe that without a test, there is no testimony. So what would you, in words of wisdom, give to those who are going through your experiences in terms of paying it forward?
I would say, whatever your challenge might be, just to hold on and to try to, gain strength. In my case, it was through going back to church, developing a relationship with the Lord, and just it's hard to put this into words, but realizing and recognizing your worth is kind of the first step towards anything greater. I think, I'm sure we've all looked around us and seen the drug abuse and the overdoses and the opioids and the meth and the cocaine, and everybody is medicating themselves because people are wounded, and a lot of us have been through a lot of trauma. You have to feel your pain. You have to allow yourself to feel the pain, not numb it out, feel it, and begin to rebuild. And you have God on your side, and just have faith in him and just put your hand in his, and you can overcome. Just like Jesus Christ overcame the world, you can overcome whatever you're going through. So I encourage you to do so, because your life has a lot of value, and believe that.
Exactly. And I'd say we've had a lot of lessons today. And of course, we say we never know what hand in life we're going to be dealt. And at the end of the day, it's how we deal with that, how we respond to that hand, that's going to make the difference. And I definitely acknowledge you, especially when it comes to our faith journey, since we'll have our tests and our trials. And so, but without them, we don't grow. Or
We
say,
don't grow, and you never know who you're going to encounter who's going through something similar, and you can talk to that person and help them get through it. But you couldn't do that if you hadn't gone through something yourself. So it's all worth something, good and bad. It's all part of our journey.
Good. And as you were sharing, you think about that, about how God speaks to us, and the matter of like looking for what is the teaching here, or what is the blessing, and the fact that, hey, we always don't know what it is because of our level of understanding, but when we're open to receive, then God's going to reveal to us what his plan is and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's why we just have to hold on.
We do have to hold on. So, Colnese, it was a pleasure. Thank you for gracing us with your gifts and your story, because after all, if we don't share our stories, who will? And said, just look forward to having you on a future show, because I know every so often we do panels, and they'd love to have you on the panel.
Well, I would love to be part of a panel, and thank you for inviting me today. And you have a wonderful rest of your day. And to the listening audience, God bless you, and I hope you'll read my story.
Thank you. This is W.D. Foster Graham, host today for Insight News. And we thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning into our channel, and we'll see you next time.
Bye now.